Hi everyone, my name is Alyssa and today I'm going to show you how to make this lovely cozy sweater. You may have seen the first version of this, which I have up on the screen here, but this is the new version that I filmed a little tutorial for and I'm obsessed with it. I hope you guys like it. It is a little bit shorter than my other one, so if you want to learn how to make this, let's get into the video.
Okay, so first we're going to start with materials. I'm going to show you the yarns that I use. So these are all of them, but more specifically the extra fine merino. That is a lightweight yarn. It's a really pretty yellow color, specifically color number 24. Next, I use the Tibet. Now this one is actually completely sold out, like literally discontinued. I love this yarn. Super disappointed that it's gone. It is a little bit lighter weight than Hobbii Divina, but really similar in the way that it looks and feels. So that one's really similar. I would say get the Divina in place of the Tibet, and then you wouldn't need to double hold it. And then lastly, I use the Alpaca Blaze. I love this one. It's a mohair type yarn, but alpaca. It's so much softer than mohair, which I like, which makes it work up a little bit easier too. This was really just to make the extra fine merino yarn a little bit softer, a little bit fuzzier like, and the color I specifically used was color 18. Now that you know the type of yarn I used, you're going to need to know how I held it. So with the Tibet, I double held it. In its place, I would say use Apricity, if I'm pronouncing that correct, or I would say use Divina in place of that, but don't double hold it. Then I held the Alpaca Blaze with the Tibet yarn as seen here. So there are technically 3 strands of yarn here, but honestly the alpaca doesn't really count. It's just to introduce the yellow color. Next, I took one of the Tibet strands out and then introduced the merino yarn. So then that's all 3 of them in this section. Lastly, I literally did only yellow. So I did 2 strands of the Alpaca Blaze and then 1 merino. And that's kind of how I created the gradient for my sweater. You will need to take these 3 measurements. So you need your wingspan, your desired sweater length, and then your bust circumference. I would suggest screenshotting this and write down each measurement so that you can look at it later. Now, the way that the structure of the sweater works, we are working from the bottom of the sweater up to the top where the neckline is. You are going to be making 2 panels the exact same way. So first we're going to start with the orange color, and I'm going to show you a little hack that I learned. If you want your sweater to be a gradient like mine, start with the darkest color and then work to the lightest. So before you do that little slip knot loop that I'm showing you on the screen, there's a little hack you can do so that you have the yarn you need to sew already ready by the end of your panel. So instead of doing this little slip knot loop, you are going to take this yarn end that you have, hold it on your fingers, and then wrap it around as many times as you think you need to be able to sew that part of the top together. I would say probably like at least half of your wingspan would be enough, and maybe even add a foot to that. That's about how much I wrapped up, and then once you feel like you wrapped up enough, then you can take a little hair clip and then clip it together, and then that's going to be there ready for you at the very end of your panel so that you can sew the underarms together. Okay, so now that I have that yarn there ready, we are going to create a slip knot loop. So I do the X method. You're welcome to look this up. I do have a tutorial in my Beginner of Beginners series. You can check that out as well. I like the X method because you can use it as a magic circle or a slip knot, kind of whatever you want. It's a great start for any project. Okay, so now you are going to create a chain that is as long as your bust circumference. So yes, that's a pretty long chain. So mine was 32 inches. So I just chained until I had enough to be 32 inches. Now this reason for this really long chain is simply because it is an oversized sweater. So if you want that beautiful flowy look, you need it to be the same size as your bust circumference. Once you chain to that length, you're going to chain 2 more, and then you're going to start your row. So you're going to double crochet in the 3rd chain from your hook. And then you are going to double crochet until the end of the row. Now there is no perfect way to double crochet in these chains. I just do the back loop because that's kind of what I prefer doing. If you want more of a straight edge, I would suggest doing it in the bump on the back. So if you turn your chain over to the back side, there's a little bump there. I would suggest doing that if you want a straight edged bottom of your sweater. Okay, I'm just going to finish up this last double crochet and then we're going to start the next row. So chain 2. And you can tighten that little slip knot loop if you want to. And then you're going to turn your project. So just flip it over to the other side. After you turn over, you're going to put your hook back in if you need to, and then you're going to double crochet in each stitch until the end of the row again. So pretty simple, first 2 rows, easy peasy. Now I'm just going to do a couple stitches for any beginners here. If you're a beginner, hi, welcome. I'm so glad that you took up crochet. But if you're used to crochet and want to get on to the next steps, you can just go ahead and fast forward a little bit. Okay, so now we've reached our very last stitch, and then we are going to start expanding this panel and create the sleeves. Okay, so you're gonna have to do a little bit of math here to figure out how long the extension sides of your sweater need to be. First, take your wingspan length minus your bust circumference. I did 54 inches minus 32 inches, and that is 22 inches. Take that new number and then divide it in half. That new number, which mine is 11, is gonna be your sleeve length, which is also how much you need to chain to. Oh, and don't forget to measure your chain so that it's the right measurement. So once you do that last double crochet, you're going to chain until you reach that new measurement that you just got. Oh, and if you measure in centimeters or millimeters instead of inches, you can do the same math. Literally nothing changes. Okay, once I reached my measurement, which was 11, I'm going to go ahead and measure it just to confirm that I got that 11 inches. And then we are going to pick back up where our chain was and flip our project over. And then you're going to chain 2, and then we're going to start the next row. So working into the bumps, you're going to double crochet in the third bump from your hook. And now we're doing the bumps simply because it'll be easier to sew later, because it'll be easier to see the stitches and just keep it all sturdy and together. So double crochet in each of those bumps until you reach the main project, which is those 2 rows of double crochet you have kind of in the middle. Now I'm going to kind of skip ahead here, so I'm going to do a couple more stitches and then we're going to skip ahead to the main project. Alrighty, so now we're at the very last chain there. So we're going to work in that very last bump right before the main 2 rows. And then you're going to kind of have to like twist your project here. It's going to feel a little funky, but then you're going to work into those stitches that you already have there. So double crochet in each of those stitches until the very end of the row. And that's when we're going to start foundation double crocheting. So now I'm going to do the last double crochet in the last stitch, and then we're going to start foundation double crocheting. So before you start your foundation double crochet, count how many stitches there are before your main panel. So whatever makes up that 11 inches or whatever that sleeve length was that you just did, you need to do that same amount of stitches on this other side. So I'm first going to show you how to foundation double crochet. So yarn over, insert your hook into that same stitch you just did a double crochet in, yarn over and pull a loop through. Yarn over again, pull a loop through the first chain on your hook, yarn over again, pull it through the next 2 loops or chains on your hook, yarn over again and pull it through the last 2 chains, and that is a foundation double crochet. Okay, let's do another one just to make sure that you got it all down. So yarn over, insert your hook in that bottom loop underneath that double crochet, the very first one you originally did. Yarn over, pull a loop through that, yarn over again, pull a loop through the first loop on your hook, that's creating the foundation. Then yarn over again, pull through the first 2 loops on your hook, and that is creating the bottom half of the double crochet. Yarn over and then pull it through the last 2 loops on your hook, and that is completing the double crochet. So you're just going to keep repeating this until you have the same number of foundation double crochets as you do for the first extension side that you did to create the first sleeve. Okay, I'm going to do a couple more stitches for you guys so that you can visually see it. I am a quicker crocheter, but I feel like any visual is better than none. And then I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead to the finished foundation double crochet side. This should be the same amount of stitches as side 1 and also be the same length. So both of mine were 11 inches. Now the rest of the panel is super simple. So I am going to tell you how many rows I did between color changes and whatnot, but it's literally just chain 2 at the end of each row, turn your project, and then double crochet until the end of the row. And then you repeat this until your entire panel is your entire desired length. So that was the measurement that you took in the very beginning, from the top of your shoulder until your desired length. Before I tell you how many rows I did for each color, I'm going to show you how I color change, because I feel like that's something not a lot of beginners know, and even some advanced crocheters don't know how I do it, so I thought I would share. Okay, so I like to leave a couple inches from the original color I was was already working with still attached to my project, and then I will knot the new color to it. And I'll try to get as close to the project as possible. And I haven't chained one or anything like that. I literally just pulled the last loop through to end that last double crochet. So I just knotted those pieces together. I'm gonna make sure they're secure. And then it's for the tricky part. Now this is kind of weird how I do this, but honestly it secures the ends really, really well and you don't see them, which is the best part. Okay, so I'm gonna chain 2 really quick with the new color, and then I'm going to insert my hook in the top of the double crochet and then through that first loop of the double crochet, and then I'm gonna pull the yarn ends through both of those loops. Excuse my struggle. I don't know why I struggled so hard with this, but I don't know, the yarn just was not wanting to go through this. Okay, finally the yarn made it through. So now we're gonna turn your project over, and then we're gonna keep weaving this through your stitches. Okay, so on the back side of a double crochet, you're gonna go underneath these 2 chains. Hopefully that's enough visual for you. I don't know how to explain what these stitches are. I believe it's the 3rd loop and the front loop or the back loop, one of those. But you pull that yarn through both of those towards you. Then you're gonna insert your hook into the next stitch the same way you did with this last one, and then pull the yarn through that as well. And then you're gonna keep doing this a couple more stitches in, and then eventually you will cut those ends. But that's not for a little bit. Now that I've weaved my yarn in enough, I'm going to start double crocheting with the new color. You're going to be double crocheting around the yarn ends that you like weaved through. So you might have to like move your stitches around to go underneath them for some stitches so that you're crocheting around them. That's the whole key in order to get them to stay in place, is by crocheting around them in every stitch. And I'm just going to do the last couple stitches, and then I will show you how I cut my yarn. Okay, here's the last stitch that I'm gonna double crochet around, and then we're gonna go ahead and cut the yarn ends that are kind of sticking out there. There's no need to crochet around them anymore. And if you understood anything about how I weave my ends in, then go you, because I feel like it's really hard to explain. It's kind of like a me brain thing, but I still wanted to show you guys. Okay, so pretty much you're just gonna keep adding rows of double crochet, but first I'm gonna go ahead and show you how many rows I did for each color. Here's a little chart that you can look at. You can even screenshot and look back at it later, but I did 7 rows of the orange, 4 rows introducing yellow for the first time, 4 rows introducing the Merino with the Alpaca and the Tibet, and then 7 rows of just the yellow yarn, which again was 2 strands of the Alpaca and 1 strand of the Merino. To finish your panels, you are going to chain 1 after that very last double crochet, and then you're going to leave enough yarn left over still attached to be able to sew the top of your sleeves together. So as you can see, I am leaving quite a bit and then cutting my yarn. Be sure to pull through that yarn end through that last chain you did so that it is nice and secure, and then you don't have to worry about your panel falling apart. Now I'm going to wrap up this yarn and then clip it to the panel so that I can use it later to sew both of my panels together. Once your panel is your desired length, then you're going to make a second one literally the exact same way. Once you complete both panels, lay them directly on top of each other like so. You want to make sure that each corner is lined up perfectly. So make sure that that top corner is going to be lined up, and then you're going to make sure the bottom corners are lined up as well. Now all that's left is literally sewing and then doing the cuffs. So you're going to sew the bottom where my fingers are pointing, and a brief pause. When you lay your panels on top of each other, you need to make sure that one corner has one ball of yarn that you can use for sewing, and then the other corner has the other ball. You don't want both of them to have the ball of yarn to use for sewing, because that'll mess you up and then defeat the entire purpose. Okay, now let's sew the bottom. So grab that yarn ball, unwind it, and then we're going to sew the bottom together. So insert your needle into the very bottom of the back panel, or whichever panel doesn't have the yarn attached to it. This is just securing it in place so that we can continue sewing. And I did the whip stitch method. There are many different methods you can choose, but I prefer the whip stitch, which is literally just traditional sewing. So if you already know how to sew things together, just sew it together to the best of your ability. There's no perfect way to do it. I try to match up the stitches as best I can, or like the stitches in rows, but really as long as it's aligned as best as possible, it'll look great in the end. So for this bottom portion, I am just doing this regular speed, and then I will speed up the rest of the sewing so that you guys don't have to sit through all of this boringness. Alright, so just sew the bottom of your sleeve together like I am doing, and then once you reach the very end, do not cut your yarn or sew it in or anything like that. Leave it there. I just sewed the last couple stitches together, and then I'm going to go ahead and wind this yarn up and then clip it to the bottom of the project, because later we are going to use this to then sew the cuff around the entire sleeve so it creates that puff. Now repeat this entire process on the other side of your sweater so that the bottom half is completely secure, and then you're ready to start the top. Before you start sewing the top of your sleeves together, you're going to need to mark where you want your neckline to be. So these white marks right here are where my neckline is marked. And now we're going to sew the top of your panels together. So this is going to be the top of the sleeves. So you're going to sew from the very far edge where that yarn ball should be that you wound up to use for sewing later. You're going to sew the top of the panel until your stitch marked stitch, which should be one of the stitches you marked for that neckline. Now again, just like the bottom of my sweater, I'm using the whip stitch method, and that's just going in one double crochet and then in another double crochet in the opposite panel. Once you reach that stitch marker, you are going to knot that yarn end to your project just to secure it in place, and then you're going to weave that end in. So I'm just going to show you real quick how I'm knotting my yarn to my project just to secure everything so that I have a nice good tight neckline, and then that way I don't have to worry about it all falling apart later. Then you're just going to repeat this process on the opposite side of your sweater until everything is sewn together. Now that everything is sewn together, we're going to go ahead and start that cuff at the bottom. So go back to that very end where that wound up yarn is, because we're going to use that to start the cuff. Okay, so to the right of where that yarn is coming from, there is a double crochet. You're going to insert your hook in the bottom half of that double crochet. Then you're going to grab that yarn and pull a chain through. Then chain once more, and then we're going to start single crocheting two together. So insert your hook into the bottom half of that first double crochet to the left, and then pull a chain through, insert your hook into the top of that double crochet and pull a chain through, and then you're gonna pull a chain through all of the loops on your hook. And that is single crocheting two together, at least for this specific project. Let's do that again. Insert your hook in the bottom half of the double crochet, pull a chain through, insert it in the top half of the double crochet, pull a chain through, and then pull a chain through all of the loops on your hook. Now you're going to continue this until you reach your first stitch. So I'm just going to show you a couple more stitches, and then we're going to go ahead and skip. This is what your first couple of stitches should look like, and now we're going to keep doing this around the entire end of the sleeve until the very first stitch. Once you get to that first stitch, you are going to slip stitch in that first single crochet. Then you are going to chain one, and then you're literally going to be doing that exact same row again. So insert your hook in the first stitch and pull a chain through. Insert it in the next stitch, pull a chain through, and then pull a chain through all of those loops on your hook. Now you're going to keep doing this of single crochet two together until the very end of the row. This row is super important because it is going to create that true like puff sleeve for you. Only doing the first row would lead to a less exaggerated puff sleeve, so if you want a really exaggerated puff sleeve like mine, I definitely suggest doing the second row. Then once you reach the very first stitch, you're going to slip stitch in it, and then you are going to cut the yarn end, and then we're going to finish off the project. So if you already know how to do this, you definitely don't have to watch it. You just have to do this to the other sleeve. But if you don't know how to do this, here's how how you do it. After you pull that yarn through a needle, you are going to insert that needle in the second stitch of that row. Then you're going to pull that yarn through, insert your needle back into the original loop it came from, and then that's literally how you finish it off. To make sure it's extra secure, knot this yarn end somewhere inside your project, and then weave in that yarn end. And I'm going to show you how I do that. So instead of just knotting it once, I knot it twice just to make sure it's extra secure and it's not going to come undone. Then I just weave it in where I think it's best and where I feel like it won't fall out or come loose. Then I just cut my yarn end and then boom, I'm all done. This is what a finished sleeve should look like at the very ends. And then you have finished your cozy sweater. I hope you guys loved this tutorial. If you did, make sure to like and subscribe and check out my other videos. If you ever want the latest updates, follow me on Instagram. Oh, and make sure to tag the Soulful Now in your posts. I'll repost them. I can't wait to see your cozy sweaters and hope you loved making yours.